Welcome back to Shadow Fear. I'm your host, and tonight we're venturing deep into Alaska, a place where the sun disappears for months and the dark hides things far older than humanity itself. What you're about to hear isn't rumor or legend. These are 9 true accounts, records and testimonies that were never supposed to reach the public. A nurse who watched her patient's teeth fall out, only to see new ones grow back, sharper and inhuman. A police officer who discovered people frozen alive, eyes moving, minds still trapped inside their icy prisons. And that's only the beginning. These aren't campfire stories. They're official reports from those who survived and those who didn't. Some vanished after giving their statements. Others begged to forget what they saw, what's still out there in the frozen dark. Hasn't stopped watching. So before we begin, subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't watch this alone. Because in Alaska's endless night, something is waiting, and it's far worse than you think. Let's start with the first account. My name is Sarah Kanguk, and I've been a registered nurse for 8 years. I grew up in Chinook, a small village crouched beside the Kobuk River where winter stretches for months and silence can feel like a living thing. After earning my degree in Anchorage, I came home to work at our tiny clinic, the only one within 60 miles. It's a single-floor building with humming generators, fluorescent lights that never quite stop flickering, and a radio that cuts out whenever the wind rises. Out here, we patch up frostbite, deliver babies, and stitch snow machine wounds with hands that tremble from cold more than fear. I thought I'd seen everything this wilderness could do to a human body. I was wrong. My grandmother used to whisper old stories when the storms came. She said hunger could drive a soul into darkness, could turn a person into something that walked on 2 legs but no longer deserved the name human. She called it the Wendigo, the eater of men. I laughed those tales away as a child. They were warnings, not truths, until the winter of 2023, when one of our own came back from the ice changed forever. It was March 15th, the kind of morning when breath freezes in your lashes. The sky was colorless, the world nothing but white and the sound of the generator coughing outside. I was checking our supply inventory when I heard the distant thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades. Nobody flew in storms like this unless it was life or death. Through the swirling snow, the medevac bird appeared, bright red against gray sky, and touched down on the pad behind the clinic. The paramedics rushed in carrying Robert Sheldon, a mechanic from our village. Everyone knew him. Solid man, 34, 2 kids, quick smile. His hunting partner, Marcus Pete, hadn't survived their 5-day ordeal in the backcountry. They said Robert had been found in an emergency shelter, barely conscious. When they lifted the blanket from him, my stomach turned. His skin was ashen, almost translucent, and ice crystals clung to the edges of his hair and beard. I took his vitals, body temperature 89 degrees, dangerously low, but his pulse was steady, strong even. His eyes, though, unsettled me. They weren't the dull, confused eyes of hypothermia victims. They were sharp, fixed on me with a hunger that felt wrong. "How are you feeling, Robert?" I asked. He licked cracked lips. "Hungry," he whispered. "Really hungry?" "Do you have meat?" "Raw meat?" At first I thought he was delirious. I brought him chicken soup, but he turned his face away like it repulsed him. "Not cooked," he muttered. "Raw." The word stuck to my ribs like ice. We wrapped him in heated blankets, ran warm IV fluids, raised the room temperature until sweat beaded on my forehead. But his core temperature never budged from 89. It was as if the warmth slid off him, refused to stay. That night, when the clinic had gone quiet, I heard a faint scratching from his room. Metal against metal, a rhythmic scraping that set my teeth on edge. I found him sitting upright, dragging his fingernails across the bed rail. The nails had lengthened, pale, curved, almost translucent like the rest of him. "You'll hurt yourself," I warned. He looked at me, eyes glinting in the dim light. "You smell warm," he said softly. So warm. I made a note in his chart. Possible delirium. But the truth is, I was frightened. Something inside him felt alert in a way no human body at 89 degrees should be. The next morning, his wife, Linda, came with their children. Little Tommy was 8, his sister barely 5. I was in the hallway when Linda screamed. I ran in and froze. Robert's mouth was bleeding. His teeth had loosened, falling into his hands. New ones were pushing through his gums, longer, pointed, the color of old ivory. Linda clutched the children and bolted. Robert tried to speak, but his words slurred through the blood. "Don't let them see me," he begged. We sedated him and took x-rays. What the images showed shouldn't exist. Beneath the old teeth, new bone growth formed elongated canines. Not human, not animal, something between. That night I called my grandmother. She was 82 and still sharp as the north wind. "Ananu," I said, using the old word for grandmother. "Tell me about the Wendigo again." There was a long silence. "Then why granddaughter?" I told her everything. The cold that wouldn't leave him, the craving for raw flesh, the new teeth. When I finished, she sighed. "He ate the other one, didn't he?" "The friend who died. I felt my blood go cold." "How could you know that?" "Because that is how it begins," she whispered. "When the flesh of another passes your lips, the hunger moves into you. It grows until it takes everything. By the third day, the change was visible to anyone. His skin had thinned until I could see dark lines of veins pulsing beneath. His fingernails had hardened into talons. When patients came near, he grew restless, sniffing the air like a wolf catching scent. When a pregnant woman visited for her checkup, Robert went berserk, throwing himself at the door and snarling. "I can smell the blood," he roared. "The baby's blood!" We barely sedated him. Supplies were low. The next shipment wouldn't arrive for a week. I started locking the clinic's interior doors. But that night I found him in the lab, crouched over our sample freezer. He'd pried it open and was eating raw fish meant for contamination testing, blood, scales, and all. His face glistened. "It tastes perfect," he said, smiling with those new teeth. His arms looked longer. His spine was curving forward, making him seem less man, more beast. By day 4, he no longer walked upright. He prowled. His voice deepened, guttural. "They're calling to me," he told me when I checked the restraints. "The others in the forest. The ones who came before. They want me home." I contacted the tribal council, hoping someone might know an old cure, a ritual, anything. The line was silent for a long time before Elder Joseph Sheldon, Robert's uncle, spoke. "If what you say is true, child, you can't help him. And you can't let him stay." "He's your family," I said. He was. That night the storm hit, the worst of the season. The wind screamed at 60 miles an hour, shaking the building. The generator stuttered. Half our lights flickered out. When I went to check on Robert, his bed was empty. The window was shattered inward. Claw marks gouged the frame. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and radio, following the blood trail into the storm. My boots sank deep into drifts. Snow stung my face like salt. The tracks led north toward an old trapper's cabin 2 miles out. Through the whiteout, I saw a dim red glow. Inside, the air reeked of rot and wood smoke. Robert was there, but not alone. 3 others sat around the fire, their bodies in various stages of corruption. One was almost fully changed, gray-skinned with yellow eyes that reflected my light. Another still had traces of humanity, but the same growing claws and fangs. The third looked nearly normal, except for the hunger twisting her expression. "You followed him," said the creature closest to the fire. The voice was raspy yet familiar. "Marcus Pete!" My stomach lurched. "You died in the storm," I whispered. "I did," he said, smiling with too many teeth. "But not the way you think. Robert didn't find my body. He made it. The cabin's floor was littered with bones, some animal, some not, and clothing from different decades." "How long have you been here?" I asked. A woman's voice answered from the shadows. "Decades. We take turns going back to the villages. We find the lost, the desperate. We show them how to survive." Robert stepped forward. His transformation was almost complete. Skin translucent, eyes black pits of hunger. "I tried to fight it, Sarah," he rasped. "But it's too strong. They're hungry and the village is full of food. They plan to hunt before dawn." I remembered my grandmother's prayers, words older than English. My voice trembled as I spoke them, tracing a circle in the air the way she'd taught me as a child. The creatures hissed and drew back, unable to cross the boundary. "Your grandmother's power is strong," Marcus said. "But it fades with every heartbeat. We can wait." When exhaustion finally broke the circle, I ran. I don't remember the sprint back to the village, only the sound of their howls behind me, rising and falling like wind through hollow bones. I pounded on doors, screaming for people to lock themselves inside. Most thought I'd lost my mind, but a few elders recognized the fear in my voice and joined me in chanting the old protection songs. All night the Wendigo circled the village. They called out in familiar voices, the voices of the dead. I heard my grandfather begging me to open the door. I didn't. At dawn, the snow was untouched, the world silent again. We told the search team Robert had died of exposure. They found torn clothing and blood in the trapper's cabin, enough to close the file. No one questioned the story. But I know better. Every winter, more hunters vanish beyond the Kobuk River. Some of them return for a while, until their eyes change. I left nursing 6 months later. Now I travel across northern Alaska, teaching the old stories my grandmother once told me. Most people smile politely the way I used to. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the spruce and the cold seeps deep enough to numb your bones, I see them listening. If you ever get lost in the Alaskan wild and someone offers you food, remember this. Ask what kind of meat it is. Because some meals don't just fill your stomach. They take what's left of your soul. My name is Tommy Nakpuk, and I've been a ranger in Denali National Park for 6 years. Before that, I hunted with my father and grandfather on the tundra north of Kotzebue. They taught me to read the language of tracks, to listen to the forest's breath, to know when I was being watched. I used to think that kind of instinct was superstition, something passed down from old men who feared the dark. But I don't laugh at their stories anymore, because last summer in August 2023, I saw what they warned me about. And now, when the wind carries that low, intelligent howl across the trees, I know they were right. It started on a Tuesday morning. The call came through the ranger radio. 3 hikers found dead near the park's southern boundary. That wasn't unusual by itself. Denali swallows the unprepared every year. But when I arrived at the scene, the snow was stained dark, and the air felt wrong, too quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I met Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife biologist from the University of Alaska. She'd been studying wolf behavior in the park, tagging packs, tracking migration, the usual research work. She believed this was a wolf attack, maybe a territorial dispute gone bad. Jennifer was sharp, driven, and sure that science could explain everything. I wanted to believe that too. The first site lay 3 miles off the main trail. The bodies were unrecognizable, torn apart in a way that didn't match any animal I'd seen. I'd witnessed grizzly maulings, moose tramplings, even wolf kills, but this was different. There was a pattern to it. The tent had been ripped in even strips, not torn randomly. The backpacks were emptied, contents organized into neat piles, tools, food, clothing laid out like someone cataloging them. Wolves don't organize. Jennifer crouched near a tree and touched deep claw marks scored into the bark. Wolves, she said. Large ones, but she trailed off, measuring the spacing with her fingers. These are too wide. They'd have to be the size of small bears. I found tracks in the mud near the fire ring. At first they looked human, bare feet, large, spaced evenly. But 10 feet farther the prints shifted. The heel marks disappeared and the toes spread wider. Then they became paw prints, massive, deep impressions that no normal wolf could make. Jennifer chalked it up to soil erosion. I didn't argue, but the hairs on my neck stood up. My grandfather's voice whispered in memory. Watch for the ones who walk both ways, the ones who forget which shape is theirs. He used to call them adlet, half human, half wolf hunters who took the form of both. I'd laughed back then. The second sight was worse. 2 hikers this time, a couple from Oregon. Their bodies were arranged deliberately, arms folded, heads turned toward the same direction. Around them, their boots were placed in a perfect circle, sleeping bags stacked neatly nearby. Their water bottles had been emptied and poured out in straight lines pointing into the forest. This is territorial marking, Jennifer said, excitement flickering in her eyes. Maybe a new behavioral pattern in wolf communication. I didn't respond. My stomach churned as I spotted the same strange footprints leading away from the scene, changing rhythm between bipedal and quadrupedal strides. We followed them deep into the woods. The trees grew close together, branches twisting overhead until the light dimmed to a permanent dusk. The silence pressed against us. We'll set up camp nearby, Jennifer said. If they're as territorial as I think, they'll come back. She spent hours setting up equipment, motion-triggered cameras, infrared scanners, sound recorders. The hum of her devices mingled with the crackle of our small fire. I gathered sage and sweetgrass and burned them quietly, whispering the old protective words my grandfather had taught me. Jennifer glanced up from her tablet. Superstitious? She teased lightly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Just respectful, I said. As the sun disappeared behind the peaks, darkness fell heavy. The forest went utterly still. No owls, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just the distant moan of the wind. Then sometime past midnight, the first howl came. It wasn't like a normal wolf's call. It started low and mournful, but the tone shifted halfway through like speech hidden inside the cry. Then another answered from the other side of the valley. Not random, but deliberate, like a conversation. My blood ran cold. Jennifer leaned toward her equipment. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. "They're communicating with structure." I stared at the monitor. Through the night vision feed, shapes moved between the trees, tall, thin, upright for a moment before dropping to all fours. "There," I pointed. "What's that?" She zoomed in. 4 figures approached from the shadows, moving in perfect formation. Their silhouettes were wrong. Too long in the limbs, their heads elongated, shoulders hunched like they carried invisible weights. "My God," Jennifer breathed. "They're walking upright." The creatures stopped at the edge of our camp, then melted into the darkness. A moment later, the howls changed. Words formed within them. I froze as one of the voices echoed across the clearing, twisted through the night. "Tommy, help me." It was my voice. My exact voice. Jennifer turned to me, eyes wide. "That did you?" Before I could answer, another voice joined in from the opposite direction. "Dr. Walsh. It's Dr. Morrison." "I'm hurt." The voice mimicked her supervisor from the university, tone perfect. "They're trying to lure us out," I whispered. The creatures circled closer. I could hear them moving just beyond the firelight, deliberate, careful. Stones clattered against the edge of our camp, testing us. One of them picked up a broken branch and pushed it across the ground, probing our gear. They weren't animals. They were learning. Through the night vision lens, I saw one of them crouch beside Jennifer's spare camera. It turned the device over in its hand, hands not paws, and pressed a button. The flash went off. The creature flinched, then smashed the camera against a tree with terrifying strength. "They know," I said. "They understand what it does." Jennifer's hands shook, but she didn't stop recording. This is a new species," she whispered. "Something between human and wolf." "No," I said. "Something that used to be human." My grandfather's stories came flooding back. The Adlet were hunters who became beasts through blood and hunger. When they killed, they took more than lives. They stole the knowledge, the voices, the very essence of their prey. Each kill made them smarter, older. As the night dragged on, the howls turned into words. They spoke in fragments, our names. The names of the hikers who'd died, the word come whispered in 20 different voices. The air felt heavy, thick with something ancient. When dawn came, the forest seemed peaceful again. Jennifer thought we were safe. I knew better. By the next night, the Adlet had multiplied. Our cameras picked up 7 distinct shapes moving through the trees. They never came too close, but we could feel them watching. One by one, our devices failed. Static on the recorders, dead screens on the cameras, GPS units showing impossible coordinates. The air smelled of wet fur and decay. "We should go," I said. "Now," Jennifer refused. "Tommy, this could change everything we know about evolution, cognition." "They're not evolution," I snapped. "They're what happens when something human gets lost in the wilderness too long." That night, they came closer. We saw their eyes glowing in the dark, intelligent, patient. Then the whispers started again, threading through the wind. Jennifer's equipment began to hum with interference, picking up fragments of human speech. "Jennifer," a voice said from the trees. It sounded like her mother. "Come here, honey." "It's okay," she trembled. "That's my mom's voice," I grabbed her arm. "It's not." The shapes moved faster now, darting between trees, shadows too swift to follow. One passed directly in front of our fire, and for the briefest second I saw its face, wolf-like but disturbingly human in its eyes and jaw. It was smiling. We ran. The pack followed, herding us away from the main trail, forcing us deeper into terrain that wasn't on any map. Every time we tried to double back, they cut us off. Their coordination was flawless, almost military. At last we reached a narrow canyon, a dead end surrounded by cliffs. I thought it was over, but then I spotted a game trail winding up the canyon wall, a steep, crumbling route, but our only chance. "They can't climb," I said. "Go." We scrambled up, fingers bleeding from the rock. Below, the Adlet paced, their snarls echoing off stone. They waited, watching with those unnatural, knowing eyes. We spent 2 days clinging to that cliff without food or water. Jennifer's tablet was dead, her research destroyed. She stared blankly at the horizon. "No one will believe us," she said. She was right. When a search helicopter finally found us, we told them what happened. They blamed it on wolves, exhaustion, stress. The reports were buried under bureaucracy and disbelief. Jennifer left Alaska soon after. She moved to Florida, where the forests are warm and the predators are ordinary. I stayed. I still patrol Denali, though I avoid certain valleys, places now marked closed for wildlife research. I tell new rangers the old stories, pretend they're cultural lessons. Some smile politely. Others see the fear behind my eyes and understand. Sometimes when I camp alone near the park's edge, I hear them. The howls begin as normal, then shift higher, sharper, almost like speech. If I listen too long, I can pick out my own name among the voices. They remember, they always remember, and they're still learning. My name is David Tanami, and for nearly 10 years I worked for the Alaska Department of Child and Family Services, stationed along the coast near Yakutat Bay. Most of my job was paperwork. Home visits, the occasional emergency removal, difficult, yes, but rooted in ordinary human misery. Until last spring, I believed every tragedy could be traced to neglect, addiction, or the brutal indifference of the cold. Then the water took that certainty from me. Now, when I drive along the coastline and see a pair of small boots abandoned near the tide line, I know better. Sometimes the sea keeps what it wants, and sometimes it sends something back that only looks like a child. It began with a missing persons call on May 12, 2023. A 9-year-old girl named Maggie Alec vanished while walking home from school. Her shoes were found side by side on the sand, toes pointed toward the ocean, her backpack zipped neatly beside them. The tide was low, the weather calm. The local police assumed she'd drowned, swept away by an undertow. I joined the search that evening, trudging through gray fog with a flashlight and radio, the sea hissing against the stones like something breathing. We never found a body. Over the next month, 2 more children disappeared from neighboring villages under the same impossible circumstances. No struggle, no footprints leading away, only those eerie, perfectly arranged belongings at the water's edge. Parents whispered about spirits, about Kushtaka, the otter people from the old Tlingit stories. I'd heard them all my life. Tricksters that mimic human cries to lure travelers into rivers, then turn them into one of their own. I dismissed it as folklore repackaged as fear. Children drown. Legends fill the gaps where reason fails. Then came the night I met Lydia Carter, the girl who came back. A fishing crew spotted her standing knee-deep in a cove 40 miles south of Yakutat. She was barefoot, clothes dripping, eyes vacant. She didn't shiver, didn't speak. When they brought her to our field clinic, I was assigned to her case because I'd handled Maggie Alec's file. Both girls attended the same school. At first, I thought she was in shock. Her body temperature was abnormally low, 92 degrees, but her pulse was steady. She wouldn't eat anything except raw fish. When we tried to warm her, she fought violently, screaming in a language none of us recognized. The next morning, I went to her room and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the aquarium we'd brought to calm her. Inside swam 2 small otters we'd rescued after a storm. She watched them with an intensity that froze me. "Lydia," I said gently, "can you tell me what happened?" She turned to me then and my breath caught. Her eyes were solid black, no whites at all, like deep pools that reflected nothing. When she opened her mouth to speak, I saw thin slits along her neck, pulse open and closed. Gills. I stumbled back. The doctor insisted they were infections or lesions from exposure, but the movement was deliberate, rhythmic, alive. Lydia whispered something then, a string of sounds that rose and fell like water over stones. I couldn't understand the words, but the otters in the tank froze, then began circling each other, agitated. I left the room shaking. That night I dreamed of the river near my childhood home. I saw small hands reaching up through the surface, pale and webbed, beckoning me forward. When I woke, my hair was damp and the window was open, though I was certain I'd locked it. Outside, the forest was silent. Not quiet, silent. Even the wind had stopped. Over the following days, Lydia's condition worsened. Her skin took on a gray sheen like scales beneath the flesh. She avoided light, crouching near water whenever she could. The other staff refused to enter her room alone after one nurse swore she heard 2 voices speaking in unison. Lydia's and a low, burbling echo underneath. I began recording our sessions. In one, she said something clear enough to translate later. The word was home. Meanwhile, more reports arrived, children gone missing in Cordova, Sitka, Huna. Always near water, always leaving their belongings behind with ritual precision. The official explanation was panic over rising tides, but I saw the pattern. Lydia wasn't just a survivor. She was a messenger. I visited the coastline where she'd been found. The locals avoided the place, calling it Black Cove. The air there tasted metallic, the rocks slick with strange moss that glimmered blue in the moonlight. I found small depressions in the mud, not quite footprints, not quite paw prints, something in between. At the waterline lay a toy boat carved from driftwood. Inside it was a clump of otter fur woven with strands of human hair. When I brought it back, Lydia reached for it instantly, clutching it to her chest. Her mouth curved into a small smile, the first I'd seen. She whispered a single word that my recorder captured clearly. Soon. The following week, a storm rolled in from the Pacific. We lost power across the village. I stayed at the clinic to monitor Lydia, but around midnight I heard a rhythmic tapping, soft, deliberate like knuckles on glass. It came from the aquarium. The otters were pressed against the glass, staring outward, their eyes gleaming silver. Lydia was gone. The door to her room hung open, water puddled on the floor. I followed the trail down the corridor to the exit. Outside, rain hammered the roof, the air heavy with salt. I spotted her at the edge of the dock, standing in the downpour, arms lifted toward the churning waves. I shouted for her to stop. She turned slowly, smiling that strange, empty smile. "They're calling," she said in a voice layered with echoes. "It's time to go home." Something rose behind her then, a dark shape breaking the surface, sleek and tall, moving with unnatural grace. It wasn't an otter. It was something pretending to be one. Its body shimmered like wet skin stretched over shifting bones. I saw a hand, human, webbed between the fingers, reach up and touch Lydia's shoulder. She didn't flinch. Together they slipped beneath the water without a sound. I ran to the edge, shining my flashlight into the depths. For a second I saw faces beneath the surface, children's faces, eyes black, mouths open, smiling. Then they vanished into the dark. The Coast Guard searched for days. They found nothing except bits of torn fabric tangled in kelp. The case was marked as accidental drowning. I filed my report, but my notes about the gills, the black eyes, the voices, they were redacted. My supervisor told me quietly, "Let it go, David. Some things are bigger than your job." But I couldn't. I drove north, following reports of missing kids along the fjords. Every time it was the same. Shoes, backpacks, toys, all placed neatly facing the sea. In one village, I met an elder named Tina Shagaluk, who still remembered the old ways. She told me that Kushtaka once lived in harmony with people, guiding lost travelers back to safety. But when humans stopped listening, when we polluted the rivers and mocked the stories, they changed. "They don't save now," she said. "They collect." That night she showed me something wrapped in sealskin, a carved bone whistle shaped like an otter's head. "If you hear them calling," she said, "blow this. It will make them forget your name." I kept the whistle. 2 weeks later, near Cordova Bay, I found another set of prints leading into the water. This time I heard the laughter before I saw the figures. It was high and sweet, the sound of children playing. I followed the voices to the shoreline. The tide was glowing faintly under the moon. Shapes darted beneath the surface, too quick, too fluid. Then a head broke the water. It was Lydia. "Come swim," she said softly. Her black eyes reflected the moonlight. "It's beautiful down here." Behind her I saw others. Dozens of faces, some half-human, some twisted with fur and whiskers, all watching me with hungry fascination. The water rose around my boots, warm despite the cold air. I felt a pressure in my skull, a whisper that wasn't mine. "Join us." Breathe the water. "It's home now." My hand went to the whistle. I blew hard. The sound wasn't like any note I'd heard. It was a shudder through the air, a vibration that made the sea foam and the figures flinch. Lydia's smile faltered. For a heartbeat, her face rippled, revealing something slick and alien beneath the human mask. Then the water exploded outward and everything vanished. When I came to, it was dawn. The shoreline was empty. Only a small shell necklace remained tangled around my boot. Lydia's necklace. The authorities found me hours later, hypothermic and incoherent. I told them I'd fallen during the search. They believed me. No one wanted to hear the truth. I resigned a month after that. I moved inland, far from the coast. But I still hear it sometimes. The soft rhythmic tapping at my window on rainy nights like knuckles on glass. I dream of water filling my lungs, of small hands pulling me gently below. Last week, a friend still with the department called me. Another child gone missing near Yakutat Bay. Same pattern, same silence. I told him to stay away from the shoreline at night, to cover his mirrors because they use reflections to watch. He laughed it off the way I once did. But when the wind shifts and I catch that faint smell of brine in the air, I know they're still out there, building their family beneath the waves. The Kushtaka don't steal children. They recruit them. And one day when the tide is high and the world is quiet enough to hear them sing, they'll come back for me. My name is Rebecca Earn, and I used to teach at Northview Elementary School in Utkigvik, the northernmost town in Alaska. Out here, winter isn't a season, it's a state of existence. For 67 days straight, the sun never rises. The world is a gradient of blue and black, lit only by the aurora that drifts like green smoke across the sky. Some people call it beautiful. I call it claustrophobic. The darkness has a way of getting inside you, whispering things that sound like your own thoughts. It was during that long dark season in January 2024 that I decided to teach a unit on Inuit mythology. It was supposed to be a way to keep the kids engaged, a cultural tie-in, something familiar but educational. My grandmother had been Inuit, and she used to tell me bedtime stories about Tornat, the powerful spirit beings who once walked among humans. They could command the weather, talk to animals, and vanish into the aurora itself. I thought sharing those stories would give the children pride in their heritage. I didn't know that stories, once spoken aloud in the polar night, don't always stay stories. My class was small, 9 students ranging from 8 to 11. Among them were Elsie Akiaruk, quiet and bright, Noah Davis, a talkative boy whose father worked with Noe, and Mika Paniuk, shy, often staring out the window as if expecting something to look back. On the day it began, the wind had been howling for hours, shaking the windows. The generator's hum was our only heartbeat. I told them about the Tornat, how they once blessed hunters, guarded the animals, and punished greed. I read them the story of Nanook the Sky Guardian, who descended from the aurora to choose children of pure heart to help restore balance when the world fell out of harmony. The kids were spellbound. They asked endless questions. How did the Tornat choose their children? Could they come back? I told them no, not anymore. The old spirits faded when people stopped believing. But 3 of them didn't seem convinced. The next morning, Noah came in with frost clinging to his hair, grinning. "Miss Earn," he said, "I saw the lights last night. They came down close, almost to the ground. They talked to me." I laughed it off. Dreams can feel real up here, especially during the dark season. But then Elsie said softly, "It wasn't a dream. They came to me too." Her voice was strange, calm, steady. "They said the world is sick. They said we have to help fix it." I remember her eyes. They seemed brighter than usual, reflecting the classroom lights like shards of ice. That afternoon, Mika didn't come to class. His mother called later, panicked. "He's been outside since dawn," she said. "He doesn't feel the cold. He just stands there looking at the sky." When I found him, he was barefoot in the snow, his skin flushed but not frostbitten. His breath didn't fog the air. "Mika," I said, wrapping my parka around him, "you're freezing." He looked up at me and smiled faintly. "They said I can stay warm now," he whispered. "They chose me." That night I couldn't sleep. The wind had died, leaving a silence so deep it pressed on my chest. I looked out my window and saw 3 small figures standing on the playground, the children looking up at the aurora, arms raised. The lights above them pulsed, spiraling down like tendrils reaching for the earth. For a moment I swore the sky bent toward them. The next day all 3 were different. Noah's skin had taken on a faint bluish pallor, his veins darker like ink. Elsie's eyes shimmered faintly even in dim light, and when she touched metal, frost bloomed across it. Mika sat quietly humming to himself, the sound low and vibrating like a bear's growl. During recess, the other children avoided them. I contacted the school counselor, Linda Carver, but she brushed it off as imagination fueled by folklore. "Kids mirror what they hear," she said. "Give it a few days." But that evening, the janitor found a pattern carved into the ice outside the classroom. 3 concentric circles linked by spirals. The shape wasn't random. It was an exact match to the ancient symbol for the Tornaruk, the bridge between human and spirit. By the end of the week, strange phenomena began spreading. Lights flickered even when the power was steady. We heard footsteps in the halls long after everyone had left. One morning, every clock in the building stopped at 3:17 a.m., the same time the aurora had flared bright the night before. Then animals started acting strange. Ravens gathered outside the school windows, hundreds of them, silent, watching. Dogs refused to go outdoors after dusk. The children said they could hear voices in the wind, calling their names in the old language. I tried to stay rational, to remind myself that isolation and endless night can warp perception, but reason began to feel like a thin blanket against something vast and ancient, pressing closer each day. Elsie came to me one afternoon after class. "Miss Ern," she said, "the Tornat are angry. They say people forgot the balance. They're going to fix it soon." "Fix it how?" I asked. She hesitated. "They'll start with the ones who took too much. The ones who don't listen." That evening, a snowstorm swallowed the town. The wind roared like a living thing. Power lines went down. The school became an emergency shelter. Parents and children huddled in classrooms. I tried to stay calm, handing out blankets, but I couldn't stop glancing at the three of them. They sat apart, whispering to one another, their eyes glowing faintly green in the dark. At midnight, I stepped outside to check the generator. The storm had stopped. The air was still, the sky alive with aurora so bright it turned the snow emerald. In the middle of the playground, the children stood again in a circle, bareheaded, their footprints steaming. I shouted for them to come inside, but my voice didn't seem to reach. The aurora above them coiled tighter, descending in swirling columns of light. I ran forward and stopped. The air vibrated. The snow lifted in a spiral, forming shapes, tall, indistinct figures of light and shadow. Faces half-formed, eyes burning cold white. They looked at me. A voice, not sound but thought, rippled through my skull. "You called us back." I realized then what I had done. In telling those stories, I hadn't just taught history. I had invoked memory. I had reminded something ancient that humans once listened. The lights touched the children and the ground cracked beneath them, glowing from within. I grabbed Elsie's arm. Her skin was ice, but she smiled. "Don't be afraid, Miss Ern," she said. "You'll see the new world soon." I pulled her away. The aurora flared violently and a wave of wind threw me backward. When I opened my eyes, the children were gone. Only 3 scorched marks remained in the snow, still steaming in the sub-zero air. The official report called it a storm-related disappearance. Search teams combed the tundra for days. Nothing. No footprints, no bodies. Just silence. A month later, the daylight returned. The endless night broke and people tried to move on. I couldn't. I started dreaming of the children standing under the green sky, eyes glowing, voices humming in unison. Sometimes I'd wake with frost on my windows, patterns forming. The same spiral circles from that night. I left teaching soon after. I moved south to Anchorage, took a job in administration. But the night doesn't leave you once you've seen what's behind it. Every winter when the aurora returns, I feel them near. Last December, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a snow globe, tiny figures of 3 children beneath swirling green lights. When I shook it, the flakes glowed faintly, swirling faster than they should have, and for a heartbeat I heard their voices whisper from within. The balance begins again. That night I dreamt of Utqiagvik. The entire town buried in ice, only the aurora moving above. The children stood atop a frozen hill, taller now, faces older, eyes burning like stars. Behind them moved others, hundreds, maybe thousands, shadows rising from the snow. When I woke, the globe sat shattered on my nightstand. The carpet beneath was wet as if snow had melted there. People still write to me asking if I'll ever return north. I tell them no. I've seen what happens when curiosity opens doors that belief once kept sealed. The Tornat aren't myths. They're patient. They waited centuries for someone to call them back, and I gave them what they needed, a voice. Now every time I see the aurora, I turn away. Because in its flickering waves, I sometimes glimpse the shapes of 3 children watching me, their eyes glowing like frozen suns. And when the wind slips through the trees just right, I swear I can hear my name carried on it, spoken in a voice that isn't human anymore. They were chosen, and they haven't forgotten who woke them. My name is Maria Kanguk, and I've been with the Nome Police Department for 12 years. I've seen what the cold can do to a person, how it creeps under your skin, steals your breath, and turns blood to glass. But nothing in my years on the force prepared me for what I saw during the winter of 2024, when the cold stopped being just weather and became something alive, something that whispered my name through the wind and wore the faces of the frozen. It started on January 7th, during the first big blizzard of the season. Winds howled off the Bering Sea, visibility down to zero, snow coming sideways. Nome knows how to survive that kind of weather. We've all lived through worse, but that night 3 people went missing within hours of each other. All locals, all experienced in the cold. The first was Eddie Ungeluk, a fisherman who'd gone out to check his crab traps before the storm hit. His wife reported him missing at dusk. By morning, his snowmobile was found idling 2 miles from town, lights still on, motor sputtering. His helmet lay beside it, but there were no tracks leading away. Just smooth snow, untouched. The wind had erased everything as if he'd stepped off the earth. 2 more followed that week. Lena Kruk, a teacher, and Will Parker, a mechanic. Both vanished in near-identical circumstances. Vehicles running, doors open, no footprints. It was like the storm itself had swallowed them whole. We organized a search team. I joined the grid on day 2, trudging through waist-deep drifts with the temperature hovering near -40. The air burned when I breathed. My eyelashes froze together. Then, about 5 miles north of the highway, we found something. The snow beneath my boots shifted hollow. I brushed away a layer with my gloved hand and screamed. Beneath the ice, staring up through the frozen sheet, was Eddie Ungeluk. His face was perfectly preserved, eyes wide open, lips parted as if caught mid-breath. There was no sign of struggle. His hands were pressed against the ice, palms outward. He looked like he'd been trying to climb up from underneath. We marked the area and radioed it in, but when the recovery team arrived, Eddie's body was gone. The ice was smooth again, as if it had sealed itself. I started to think the cold was playing tricks on me, until I saw the same thing 2 days later. This time it was Lena. Her body lay half submerged in the ice near the coastline, hair fanned out like dark seaweed. Her eyes followed me as I approached. I swear they moved. The coroner ruled hypothermia, though no one could explain how her body ended up encased perfectly within the ice shelf. When they brought her to the morgue, the temperature in the room dropped to near freezing, even with the heaters running full blast. The power flickered. I was there when they opened the body bag. Her pupils dilated. I heard a sound, faint like a sigh escaping from her frozen lungs. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind outside my house had a rhythm to it, like breathing. Every few minutes it would rise and fall in a pattern that almost sounded like words. At one point I thought I heard my name whispered in it. Maria. I tried to laugh it off, but my grandmother's stories came back to me. She used to tell me about the Kailertatang, the ice spirits that live within storms. Guardians once, she said, who kept balance between sea and sky. But when people stopped respecting the old ways, they changed. They began to claim those who walked too far into their domain, freezing their souls into the ice to join their eternal storm. I'd always thought it was mythology, the kind of tale told to keep kids from wandering off during whiteouts. But 3 dead bodies with open eyes and unbroken skin make you reconsider the stories you once ignored. A week later, another storm rolled in. The entire town hunkered down. I was on night patrol, driving the east road toward the old mining site when the radio crackled with static. Through the interference, a voice slipped through, soft, almost melodic. Maria, you shouldn't be out here. It was my grandmother's voice. She'd been dead for 9 years. I slammed the brakes, staring at the radio as it hissed and popped. Then faintly, I heard a sound outside the cruiser, a slow, deliberate knock against the window. I turned the spotlight. A figure stood in the snow, barely 20 feet away. At first, I thought it was a person. Pale parka, hood pulled low. But the light cut through the storm and I saw its face. Frost clung to the skin, but underneath was smooth like carved ice. Its eyes were white, no pupils, no life, just swirling snow trapped behind glass. Eddie? I whispered. The figure tilted its head, and when it spoke, the voice came out fractured, echoing through the wind. Maria, help me. I floored the gas, heart hammering, not daring to look back until I was halfway to town. When I did, the road behind me was empty. No tracks, no figure, just wind sweeping over untouched snow. The next morning, I returned to the site with 2 officers. The snow was undisturbed, but when I kicked at the drifts, a frozen hand broke through the surface. Fingers twisted toward the sky. It was Lena's wedding ring on the hand. After that, Nome changed. People stopped leaving their homes after dark. The storms came more frequently, and each one carried new voices in the wind. Pleading, familiar, impossible. We lost 4 more people that month. Their bodies were never recovered. I began to dream of the ice. In my dreams, I walked across a frozen sea that glowed faintly blue beneath my feet. Shapes moved under the surface, hundreds of them, faces staring upward. I could hear them murmuring in unison, whispering my name. Then my grandmother's voice again. "You must listen, child. The ice remembers." When I woke, my house was cold enough for my breath to fog. Frost covered the inside of the windows. The heater had stopped, though the power was fine. On the glass above my bed, someone had traced a message with a fingertip. "Come home." I decided to face it. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling, it wasn't going to stop. I told no one. At dusk, as the next storm gathered, I packed my parka, flare gun, and recorder, then drove north toward the coast. By the time I reached the water, the wind was screaming. Snow whirled so thick I could barely see my boots. I followed the shoreline until I found the old ice road, a path long abandoned since the melt seasons had grown unstable. My flashlight beam caught movement ahead, a shadow, then another. They emerged from the storm one by one. Dozens of them. Frozen figures walking slowly across the ice, men, women, children, all perfectly preserved, moving with stiff, jerking motions like marionettes. Their eyes glowed faintly blue. I recognized faces among them, Eddie, Lena, Will, all staring at me through layers of frost. "Maria," they whispered together, voices overlapping in the wind. "It's so cold. Help us," I backed away, raising my flare gun. "Stay back," I shouted. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest. My grandmother, or something that wore her face. Her skin was white as snow, lips pale, eyes filled with swirling frost. "You forgot us," she said softly. "You forgot the covenant. The ice gave and you took. Now it takes back. What do you want from me?" I cried. She smiled, a sad, brittle smile. "You were born of this cold, Maria. You belong to it. Come home." The others began to move closer, arms reaching. The wind cut through me, colder than anything I'd ever felt. My joints locked. I fired the flare, and for a moment the red light illuminated everything. The storm, the figures, the impossible beauty of their faces like crystal statues. Then the light went out and I was swallowed by the dark. When I woke, I was lying near the shoreline, half buried in snow. My parka was reamed with frost, my skin numb, but I was alive. The storm had passed. There were no footprints around me. No sign of the frozen figures. Just smooth ice stretching to the horizon. I tried to tell the department what I'd seen, but no one believed me. They called it exposure, hallucination, stress. I took medical leave soon after. I couldn't stay. Now, a year later, I live in Fairbanks. But every time the wind howls, I still hear her voice, my grandmother's voice calling from the storm. Sometimes when I dream, I see my reflection in the mirror of ice and don't recognize the eyes staring back. They're pale now, cloudy, like the frozen ones beneath the sea. Last week I got a call from Nome. Another blizzard, more disappearances. The officer on the line said, "They found one of the bodies, Maria, perfectly preserved under the ice." Eyes open. I hung up without speaking. Outside, snow had begun to fall. I stepped to the window and watched as frost crept across the glass in intricate patterns, spirals and circles, symbols my grandmother used to carve into the snow to honor the storm spirits. And then I heard it again. A whisper, faint but clear, carried by the wind from far away. "Come home, Maria." The frost on the window shimmered and blinked. My name is Carlos Rivera, and I used to work as a field botanist for the U.S. Forest Service near Mendenhall Glacier outside Juneau. I came to Alaska chasing the kind of silence you only find in the wilderness, where every sound is clean and the air smells like ice and pine. I thought I understood nature, that it played by rules humans could classify and name. But what I found in that forest last summer wasn't nature. It was something older, patient, and hungry, something that has been waiting for us to notice it. It started in June 2024, at the tail end of a long, wet spring. The glacier had receded farther than expected that year. uncovering patches of ground that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. My assignment was simple: catalog the new vegetation sprouting near the melt zone. The samples I collected were supposed to be routine: lichens, mosses, primitive fungi. Nothing unusual, but on my third day I found something I couldn't explain. It grew in a perfect spiral, each tendril unfurling from a central point like a Fibonacci sequence carved in green. At first glance it looked like moss, dense, vivid, almost fluorescent. But it pulsed faintly under the light, as if breathing. When I brushed my gloved hand over it, the texture wasn't soft. It was slick, like skin. I collected a small sample, sealed it in a vial, and noted the coordinates. That night in my field lab, I examined it under a microscope. The structure was nothing like plant tissue. The cells were hexagonal and seemed to shift, aligning themselves when I focused the lens. When I turned off the light, the sample emitted a faint bioluminescent glow. I thought I'd stumbled onto an unknown extremophile, something thriving on the minerals left by retreating ice. But 2 days later, when I returned to the site, the patch had grown. It now covered a 20-foot radius of ground, climbing the bases of trees, coating exposed rocks. The spiral pattern repeated itself over and over, each one perfectly identical, expanding outward. I marked the area as sensitive and called the regional research office. They told me to monitor it for a week before escalating. By the 4th day, I realized I should have called sooner. I found footprints, hiker boots, leading straight into the moss. The ground beyond was smooth, no exit prints, just impressions that sank and vanished into the green surface. The air around it smelled metallic, like wet copper. When I touched a nearby tree, I felt vibration, a faint humming that traveled through the bark. That night, I heard movement outside my tent. I thought it was a bear. When I shone my flashlight, the forest floor shimmered faintly green. The moss was spreading across roots over stones toward me. I packed my gear and moved camp a mile upriver. The next morning, I found that the moss had followed the riverbank. Where the current had touched it, thin green filaments floated downstream, swaying like tendrils. I collected another sample and mailed it to the University of Alaska's botany department. 2 days later, I got a call from Dr. Karen Ishimoto, the head of the lab. Her voice was tight. "Carlos," she said, "what exactly did you send us?" "It's a moss sample," I said. "No," she whispered. "It isn't. The cells, they're responding to the microscope light. They're moving, not reacting. Moving toward the light. That night I couldn't sleep. My satellite tablet pinged with an emergency beacon. 2 hikers missing near the Glacier Ridge Trail, less than half a mile from the moss site. Search and rescue found one of their packs, but no tracks. The last message sent from their GPS read, "Ground feels soft." Like breathing, I joined the search. We combed the area for 12 hours. Near dusk, I noticed the same spiral pattern on the forest floor, larger now, 30 feet across, almost glowing in the dim light. The air was thick, humid, and the forest felt silent in a way that made my chest ache. One of the rangers, Derek, reached down to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed the moss, he jerked back, shouting. His gloves had melted, fibers eaten away in seconds. The skin beneath blistered instantly, not burned but dissolved, as though something alive had latched on. We retreated, spraying the area with decontaminant foam. It didn't slow it down. The moss seemed to absorb the chemicals, darkening, expanding. Derek's wound worsened, veins blackening around the injury. He started shaking violently, whispering that he could hear something under his skin. By nightfall, he was gone. We found only his clothes the next morning, folded neatly beside his tent. The ground beneath them was damp and green. I contacted Dr. Ishimoto again. She said the sample in her lab had grown out of containment. They'd sealed it in a metal storage unit, but the surface temperature was climbing as if it were generating heat. "It's absorbing energy," she said. "Light, heat, maybe even sound. It's feeding on everything." I drove back to the site that night to document the spread. The moss now stretched across half a mile of forest, climbing trees, wrapping them in spirals. Some trunks were split open, their cores hollowed out and filled with green filaments. Inside the glow, I could see movement, slow, rhythmic. Like breathing. That's when I saw the face. Half buried in the moss was one of the missing hikers, or what was left of her. Her body had fused into the growth, skin translucent, eyes open and glassy. Vines sprouted from her mouth, weaving into the moss around her. Her chest rose and fell faintly, though she was long dead. I stumbled backward and hit record on my camera. The footage glitched immediately, colors bleeding, audio warping. The moss pulsed faster, almost like a heartbeat. A voice whispered then. Soft. Familiar. Carlos. It was Derek's voice. I turned toward the sound, but there was no one there. Only the wind moving through the spirals. I ran. The forest seemed to shift as I fled. Every direction looked the same, green, pulsing, endless. My GPS spun uselessly. When I finally broke through to the clearing, my boots were covered in thin green filaments that writhed when I touched them. I burned them off with my lighter. The smell was sweet and nauseating, like cooked sugar and rot. I radioed in a full evacuation order, calling it a biohazard event. But before the containment team arrived, a heavy rain fell. By morning, the moss was gone, washed away, it seemed. The ground was bare, except it wasn't. A week later, vegetation started growing back fast. Too fast. Ferns twice their normal size. Trees with bark that shimmered faintly green. Birds began nesting in the area again, but their feathers carried the same faint iridescence as the moss. One researcher who handled a sample without gloves developed lesions on his hands that never healed. Dr. Ishimoto sent me one final message before going silent. A single sentence, "It's not from here." I don't know what she meant. From outside the region? From another continent? Or something else, something not of this earth? A month later, the university sealed its biology wing after a chemical contamination incident. I went to Juneau to see for myself. The entire lab was under quarantine, but through a viewing window, I saw it, green light seeping through the cracks of the containment chamber, swirling in the same spiral pattern. 2 days after that, the building burned. The official story was an electrical fire, but when I hiked back to the glacier a week later, new moss had appeared, bright green, growing along the path where the runoff water flowed from the fire site. I tried to take more samples, but every instrument malfunctioned near it. Compass needles spun. Thermometers dropped to freezing even in warm air. My recorder picked up faint whispers when no one spoke. When I slowed the audio playback, I could make out words. We learn. We remember. We grow. The last time I went to the site was in August. The moss covered nearly 2 square miles of forest by then. It had started climbing higher into the trees, forming hanging webs that moved as if alive. Animals were disappearing again, rabbits, foxes, even black bears. A week later, hikers reported seeing green light glowing under the glacier itself. I filed one final report before leaving Alaska. No one responded. Funding was cut. The case was classified under natural anomaly. I live in Oregon now, far from the ice, but I still dream of the forest. In my dreams, I walk through green tunnels that pulse like veins. I can hear breathing all around me, slow, patient, endless. Last month, I noticed something strange in my backyard. A patch of moss growing at the base of my shed, small, perfectly circular, bright green. I tried to burn it, but it didn't catch. When I poured salt on it, the salt melted into a clear, viscous liquid. The next morning, there were 2 patches. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the trees, I swear I hear a faint whisper, soft, almost kind. We remember you. Carlos, I don't go near it anymore. The spiral is getting wider. The soil feels warm underfoot, like something breathing beneath it. And I know deep down that what we uncovered near the glacier wasn't a discovery. It was a doorway. Something ancient woke up beneath the ice, and it's growing still, spreading through roots, rivers, spores. The forests of Alaska are changing. The hunger beneath them has found a voice, and soon the whole world will learn the language of the moss. My name is Jake Morrison, and for 15 years I've worked in Alaska search and rescue, mostly in the Chugach mountain range, east of Anchorage. I've pulled climbers off ledges, found lost hunters, carried out bodies frozen stiff as boards. The mountains are ruthless but honest. You respect them, they let you live. But what I found last autumn wasn't honest. It wasn't nature or weather or bad luck. It was something deliberate. Something that watched, learned, and took. And if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear it moving up there, adding to its collection. It began in September 2024, when 2 hikers went missing near Crow Pass Trail, a route most locals know well. The first call came from a woman named Dana Larkin, whose husband Ryan hadn't checked in for 2 days. He'd gone with a friend, Ethan, to photograph glaciers. The weather had been calm, no storms, no sign of avalanche. We expected a routine recovery. Maybe they'd fallen into a crevasse or lost their gear. But nothing about this case was routine. Our team set out at dawn, me, Officer Brent Talvik, a paramedic named Sierra, and 2 volunteers from the mountain patrol. By noon we reached the hikers' last known location. We found their tent shredded but intact enough to tell it hadn't been ripped by wind. The fabric was torn in long, even slashes, almost surgical. No blood, no struggle. Everything was still there, packs, food, cameras. The only thing missing were the men. Sierra crouched by the fire pit. "Jake," she said, pointing. "Look at this." In the ashes lay a pile of objects arranged neatly in a circle. 2 watches, a knife, and 2 pairs of sunglasses, all positioned like someone had set them down for display. At the center was a single human tooth. Brent swore under his breath. "Bear?" "Bears don't collect souvenirs," I said. "We found prints about 20 yards from camp. At first glance, they looked human. Bare feet, but large, almost twice the size of mine. Yet the spacing was off. Each step sank deep, as if whatever made them weighed far more than it should have. The tracks led up the ridge into a narrow pass where the wind howled through like a living thing. As we followed, I noticed something strange. Every few minutes I'd hear voices, soft, muffled, as if someone was calling my name from just out of sight. The others heard it too. Sierra thought it was wind, but I'd worked these ridges my whole career. Wind doesn't say your name. By dusk, we found what was left of Ethan. He was half buried in scree at the base of a cliff, face upward, eyes open. But his expression wasn't fear. It was confusion, like he'd seen something familiar right before he died. His skin was pale, bloodless, almost translucent. His body was positioned perfectly straight, hands crossed on his chest. While Sierra checked vitals, I noticed his mouth was sewn shut, not crudely but with precision, using fishing line. His camera was nearby. I powered it on, hands shaking. The last photo showed Ryan, smiling at the lens. Behind him, something tall and out of focus stood among the trees. Its outline was wrong. Too long. We radioed base camp for extraction, but the signal kept breaking up. The last clear words I heard were, "Stay put until," before static swallowed the rest. That night, none of us slept. The air was too still. Around midnight, Sierra shook me awake. "Did you hear that?" Voices, whispering, coming from the direction of the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the dark. For a split second, I saw Ryan standing there, alive, grinning, waving for me to come over. My heart leapt. I started toward him, but Sierra yanked me back. "Jake, stop! Look at his feet." He wasn't standing on the ground. His legs ended in nothing, just darkness. The image shimmered, then folded into the night. We huddled close, weapons ready, until the whispers faded. When morning came, the forest was dead quiet again. We packed Ethan's body and started back down the trail. After an hour, I realized something was wrong. Brent was gone. One moment he was 10 feet behind me, the next, nothing. No sound, no struggle, no tracks, just air. We searched for 3 hours, circling back to the last spot we'd seen him. His radio was there, lying neatly on a flat rock. Beside it were his gloves, folded perfectly. I knew then we weren't dealing with any animal. Sierra and I made camp by a small lake as night fell. The water was still as glass, reflecting the dark peaks around us. I tried to radio for help again. This time someone answered. But the voice wasn't human static, it was Brent's. "Jake," he said. "Don't leave. I found them." "Come see." "Brent?" I said, trembling. "Where are you?" No reply. Only the faint sound of breathing. Then a click and silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every few minutes I'd hear branches snapping outside the tent, soft footfalls pacing around us. At one point I peeked out. Something crouched near the water's edge. Tall, emaciated, moving with a strange mechanical slowness. It held something in its hands. My stomach twisted when I realized what it was. Brent's jacket still zipped. The creature turned its head toward me. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for the suggestion of eyes that gleamed faintly green, like reflections from glass. It tilted its head as if studying me, then melted back into the dark. By morning, Sierra was gone too. Her sleeping bag lay open beside mine. On the ground, arranged in a perfect circle, were small objects: her badge, flashlight, compass, and knife, all cleaned of blood and dirt. I don't remember much after that. I ran, for hours, maybe days. The forest seemed endless, twisting back on itself. I found familiar landmarks, trees, boulders, repeating like I was moving in circles. At some point, I stumbled into a cave carved into the mountainside. Inside, the air was damp and freezing. The walls glistened with frost. I turned on my flashlight and nearly dropped it. The walls weren't rock. They were covered in bodies, hundreds of them, embedded upright in the frozen surface like insects in amber. Men, women, children, all perfectly preserved. Their eyes followed me as I moved the light. Each had small objects displayed beside them. Necklaces, watches, gloves, personal items meticulously arranged. At the far end of the chamber stood a figure, tall, human-shaped, skin pale gray, stretched thin over a skeletal frame. It held something in its hand, Sierra's radio. When it spoke, the voice came out in perfect imitation of hers. "Jake," it said softly, "we found them." My knees gave out. The creature tilted its head, studying me the way a scientist studies a specimen. Then, without warning, it spoke again, this time in my voice. "Jake Morrison, age 38, divorced. One daughter, Lily." My blood went cold. It knew me. Every detail of my life spilled from its mouth. Where I lived. What I'd said to my daughter the last time we spoke. Even things no one else could know. Its voice shifted, mimicking every tone perfectly, until the cave was filled with hundreds of overlapping whispers, all speaking in the voices of the missing. "Don't leave. Help me. It's beautiful here." I backed away, tripping over something soft. When I shone the light down, I saw Brent's face staring up from the ice, eyes open, mouth sewn shut with green thread. I fired 3 rounds into the creature. It didn't move. The bullets hit its chest and disappeared into the skin as if swallowed. It tilted its head again, imitating my gasp. Then it raised one long skeletal hand and pointed at me. The floor beneath me cracked. The ice split and I fell through into freezing water. When I surfaced, the cave was gone. I crawled onto the shore, coughing, numb. Somehow I made it down the mountain. The official report said I suffered hypothermia and trauma-induced hallucinations. They found no cave, no bodies, no sign of the moss-like ice I described. The entire area was sealed off for safety reasons. But 2 months later, hikers found a camera buried in the snow near Crow Pass. It was mine. The photos were corrupted except one. The final frame showed the cave clear as day. Dozens of figures frozen in the walls, their eyes shining faintly in the flashlight beam. I left search and rescue after that. I couldn't keep going back up there. But sometimes, late at night, my phone rings from an unknown number. When I answer, there's silence for a few seconds. Then a voice that sounds exactly like mine says, "Come back, Jake, the mountain remembers you." A few weeks ago, my daughter called. She'd gone hiking with friends near the Chugach foothills. She said they found something strange in a clearing, objects arranged in a perfect circle. A compass, a photograph, a ring. She sent me a picture. In the center of that circle was a small badge, half buried in frost. My badge. I told her to leave immediately, to never go back. She laughed, said I was being dramatic, but I can't shake the feeling that something up there has been waiting, watching, expanding its collection. And when the wind comes down from the mountains at night, I hear it again, hundreds of voices whispering together in perfect imitation of my own. We're still here, Jake. My name is Danny Kozlov, and I've been a fisherman out of Kodiak, Alaska for more than 30 years. I've seen storms tear the sea apart and haul men under before they could scream. I've seen whales breach so close I could taste the salt spray off their backs. The ocean is a god here, merciless but fair. You respect it, it gives back. You get greedy, it takes everything. That's what I used to believe until last summer, when I learned there are things beneath the waves that don't follow any of the ocean's rules. Things that don't just kill to eat, they collect. It began in June 2024 during the start of salmon season. The weather was calm, the water like dark glass. My boat, the Windwalker, had just been overhauled, and my partner, Tommy Hale, and I were running our usual route along the Shelikof Strait. The fish were running strong that year, nets heavy, profits good. Then one morning we found something that made both of us sick. A sea lion floated belly up near the stern, still breathing, eyes wide. Its skin was gone, every inch flayed clean, muscle shining slick in the dawn light. But there was almost no blood in the water. The cuts were too precise, too clean, like surgical work. It should have been dead. It wasn't. The thing blinked once, opened its mouth, and made a sound that wasn't an animal cry. It sounded like breathing through water. Tommy crossed himself. "Christ," he whispered. "Who would do that?" We radioed it into wildlife enforcement, but by the time they arrived, the carcass had sunk. The next day, we found another one. Then 3 more, all the same. Skinned, eyes moving, alive long enough to see us watching. The official line was illegal poaching, some black market operation trading in hides, but I've gutted enough fish to know when something dies by human hands. These hadn't. 2 weeks later, Tommy went missing. He'd gone out alone in his skiff after dark, chasing a sonar ping he said was too big to be a fish. I told him to wait for daylight, but he laughed. "If it's a whale, we'll be rich with footage. National Geographic stuff." His skiff drifted back to harbor 3 days later, engine idling, cabin lights still on. Tommy wasn't on board. The only thing inside was his catch freezer, packed full of skins, not fish. Not seals. Pieces of something else. They were smooth, translucent, shaped roughly like wetsuits. Some were too big for humans, others the size of children. When I touched one with my glove, it felt warm. Beneath it, something twitched. I slammed the lid shut and called the Coast Guard. They took the boat, sealed it for evidence. But the next morning, it was gone from the dock. No one knew who authorized the removal. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sea was flat calm, no wind, no waves, just stillness that pressed against my ears. Around midnight, I heard something scrape the hull. I went topside with my flashlight. The beam caught a slick trail of water leading across the deck, like something had climbed aboard and left again. Over the next few nights, the harbor changed. Fishermen started finding skins tangled in their nets, thin layers of what looked like jellyfish membrane but shaped eerily like faces. One man swore he saw a hand rise from the water and snatch a mackerel right off the line. He quit the next day, packed his things, and flew south. I should have done the same, but Tommy was my friend, and whatever had taken him had left a trail. 2 weeks later, a Coast Guard diver named Reynolds came to find me at the dock. He'd been assigned to inspect the area where Tommy vanished. He looked shaken. "You've been out there more than anyone," he said. "Ever heard of the Skinner's Cove?" I hadn't. He handed me a photo taken from a submersible drone, a wide underwater cavern, walls lined with something that looked like hanging sheets. But when I squinted, I saw faces stretched across those sheets, dozens of them. Some human. Reynolds leaned in close. They weren't cut. They were shed. Like molting. That word stuck in my head. Molting. Like snakes. We went out that night against protocol, just the 2 of us. The sea was dark and still, the moon barely a sliver. When we reached the coordinates, the sonar lit up with shapes, large, slow, moving in a circle beneath us. Reynolds lowered a submersible camera into the water. The feed came through static at first, then cleared. What I saw made me forget to breathe. At least 6 figures moved below, pale and smooth, limbs too long, heads featureless except for faint outlines where eyes should be. Their skin shimmered faintly, changing color as they passed through beams of light, mimicking fish, rocks, each other. One of them rose toward the surface. When it reached the camera, it pressed a hand, human-shaped but webbed, against the lens. The feed cut to black. We reeled the line up. The camera was gone, cable snapped clean. The water beneath us began to glow faintly green. Then something knocked against the hull. Once, twice, hard enough to rock the boat. Reynolds grabbed the spotlight, sweeping it across the waves. "There!" he shouted. I saw it, a face breaking the surface, white as bone, expressionless. Then another. Then dozens. They moved in silence, circling the boat. When the light hit them, their faces changed, shifting to mimic ours. One of them opened its mouth. The sound that came out was wrong, garbled, as if trying to speak. "Tommy," it said. Reynolds dropped the light. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It knows." Before he could finish, something grabbed him by the leg and yanked him overboard. I heard one splash, then nothing, no scream. The water went calm again. I started the engine, full throttle toward shore. As I turned, I saw movement behind me, something climbing onto the stern. A pale arm, fingers gripping the railing. I swung the spotlight. The thing's face was inches from mine, wearing Tommy's skin. It smiled, lips too wide, eyes dead and black. I hit it with the flare gun. It fell back into the water, the skin blistering and peeling away like burned plastic. Beneath it, for just a moment, I saw what was underneath. A body made of slick muscle, glistening, faceless. Then it was gone. I reached harbor at dawn, shaking, soaked, babbling about creatures that wore skin-like clothing. The Coast Guard found no evidence, no camera, no body, no Reynolds. My story was filed as trauma-induced hallucination following exposure. They told me to rest, but I know what I saw. And I know the sea didn't let go of Tommy. It changed him. A few days later, I went back to check my boat. The lock on the cabin door was broken. Inside, the walls were covered in condensation, the floor slick with seawater. And there, in the corner, hung something from a hook, one of those skins. But this one was my size. My face. I burned the boat that night. Watched it go up in flames, sinking into black water. Thought it was over, until last month. A trawler out of Seward reported finding a massive pod of whales behaving strangely. They were breaching in perfect synchronization, surfacing in geometric patterns. When the crew got closer, they realized the whale's eyes were wrong. Too small, too human. And when they cut one open after it died, they found its stomach full of skin. Layers of it rolled tight. Now bodies have started washing ashore along the Gulf. Fish, seals, and one or two human remains stripped clean. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just smooth, shining flesh. The Coast Guard keeps calling it ecological trauma. But I've seen the reports. They match what we found last year. Last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small vial filled with seawater. Floating inside was a piece of translucent flesh. When I held it to the light, I saw something etched faintly on the surface. Letters, tiny but clear. My name. Since then, I can't stand the sound of the ocean. Even from my house inland, I swear I hear it whispering at night. Soft, rhythmic, like breathing. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel the air change around me. The smell of salt and iron. The pressure of unseen depths pressing close. 2 nights ago, I woke to the sound of dripping water. The floor was wet. My window was open, curtains fluttering. On the sill lay a single object. A small piece of translucent flesh curled like a glove. I burned it, but the smell stayed on my hands, sweet and rotten at once. I think they've found a new market. The sea's full of traders after all, and trade never stops. They took skins from animals for decades. Now they've learned how to fit ours, and maybe that's the point. Maybe they've been learning how to be us. When I walk through town, I see people with faint scars along their necks, thin lines like seams. When they smile, their skin pulls too tight. Their eyes gleam wet like something freshly peeled. I don't fish anymore. I don't even go near the water. But the rain still finds me. It tastes wrong, too salty, too alive. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in a puddle, it smiles a second after I do. My name is Linda Aknavagak, and for 12 years I've worked as a social worker across the Arctic villages of Alaska, helping families, checking schools, trying to keep children safe in places where the cold is a living thing. I thought I'd seen everything: neglect, hunger, loss. But last winter, something older than grief came crawling out of the ground itself. It came with a song. It began in November 2024 when the dark settled early and refused to lift. In Kivalina, a teacher called me about her class. "They won't stop singing," she said, her voice shaking. All day, all the same melody. When I arrived, the school felt wrong, the air too still, the hallways echoing with a soft, eerie humming. Inside the classroom, 12 children sat at their desks, swaying slightly, eyes half closed, humming a tune that crawled up my spine. No lyrics, just a pattern of notes repeating again and again, mournful and sweet. The sound felt ancient, older than language, older than the wind. I clapped my hands, called their names. They didn't react. Only one girl, Annie Kuluk, looked up. Her eyes were black from edge to edge, like the pupils had swallowed everything else. "We're practicing," she whispered. "The bones taught us." The teacher burst into tears. I ended the session and called a medical team, but the children were fine. Heart rate steady, pupils reactive, vitals normal. Yet they kept humming, even in sleep. When I tried recording it, my phone glitched, audio distorting into static. 2 days later, the ground behind the school split open. The janitor found what looked like human bones poking through thawing permafrost, hundreds of them bleached and ancient. Some still arranged in neat rows as if they'd once belonged to a buried village. Archaeologists were called and the school closed. But the singing spread. Children in nearby homes started humming the same tune. Then adults began hearing it too, faintly, in the wind, in the hum of refrigerators, in their dreams. At night, the town was filled with that low chorus, hundreds of voices humming in perfect harmony. I stayed in Kivalina, documenting everything. My grandmother had told me stories of the bone singers, spirits buried in the permafrost, bound by ice for centuries. When the world grew too warm and the ice began to melt, they would rise again, calling their descendants to join their eternal choir. I used to think it was just a story to make us respect the dead. Now I wasn't so sure. By the end of the week, the temperature rose above freezing, unnatural for November. The snow turned to slush. Fog rolled in from the ocean, heavy and sour smelling. The singing grew louder. That night I woke to a sound beneath my floorboards. A soft tapping, rhythmic, the same beat as the children's song. When I lifted the rug, I found small cracks in the wood, frost forming in perfect circular patterns. From below came the faint echo of voices. The next morning I went back to the school. The excavation site had expanded, a pit 20 feet deep filled with ice and bones. Workers were gone. Their equipment lay abandoned, still running. The fog was so thick I could barely see, but I heard it clearly, the melody rising from the hole. I peered over the edge. The ice moved. Beneath the translucent surface, skeletal figures stirred, locked together in rows, their jaws opening and closing like they were still singing. I stumbled back and fell. The air around the pit vibrated, the sound so low it shook my teeth. When I returned to the village, the streets were empty. Every door shut. But from inside the houses I heard the song, voices of men, women, children, all blending into that same impossible harmony. At sunset, the fog turned green. Shapes moved within it, tall, thin silhouettes walking slowly between houses, leaving trails of frost where they passed. I hid inside the clinic and waited. Through the window I saw Annie standing in the snow, barefoot, face turned upward, humming. Behind her something rose from the ice. It was human and not. Its body was skeletal but wrapped in a thin layer of translucent flesh, veins glowing faint blue. Its jaw hung slack as it joined the girl's song. More shapes followed, climbing out of the frozen ground, hundreds of them swaying in rhythm. The fog carried their voices across the village like wind through bone flutes. When I tried to record it again, my phone froze, screen frosting over from the inside. By dawn, the song had stopped. Half the town was gone. Families vanished from locked homes, beds still warm. Only Annie remained, standing outside the school, silent now, her eyes pale as milk. "They're not dead," she told me calmly. "They're just learning the harmony." I took her to the regional hospital in Kotzebue, but the doctors found nothing wrong. She didn't speak again, only hummed softly the same tune. They transferred her to Anchorage for observation. That night, the power went out. I lit candles. In the dark, I heard the song again, not outside, but beneath me. The floor vibrated. The frost patterns returned, curling like runes. And through the window, I saw lights moving out on the tundra, lines of them, like lanterns carried by invisible hands moving toward the horizon. 2 days later, reports came in from other towns, Noatak, Point Hope, Barrow. Children singing, ground cracking, bones thawing. One helicopter crew sent to investigate didn't come back. Their radio broadcast one final transmission, a faint melodic hum. When I played it back later, slowed to half speed, I heard words woven into the song. In Inupiaq, they meant the choir must grow. I flew back to Anchorage to check on Annie. The hospital room was empty. The nurses swore they'd seen her that morning, sitting by the window humming. Then the power had flickered and she was gone. All that remained was frost on the floor, shaped like a handprint. I quit my job the next day. Packed what I could, drove south toward the Yukon. I thought I'd escaped until the first thaw of spring. It started small, a melody on the radio that shouldn't have been there. Then in the local school, a child began humming. Same rhythm, same haunting tune. The permafrost is melting faster each year. Every time it cracks, the earth exhales, releasing the voices buried beneath. Scientists call it cryoseismic activity. They don't understand what's crying. Last week, a researcher sent me photos from a new excavation near the Kuskokwim River. The team found a chamber filled with arranged skeletons, skulls stacked like choir seats, each with holes carved neatly in the jawbones. They said when the wind blows through the site, it sounds like flutes. They laughed when they told me that. I didn't because I know what happens next. The song spreads. It's in the air, in the static between stations, in the hum of power lines. It doesn't need voices anymore, it just needs listeners. Once you've heard it, it stays. Waiting. Sometimes when the world goes quiet, I hear it again, faint and far away. The melody threads through my bones like something remembering how to sing. And last night, when I looked out across the snow, I saw them, figures moving through the dark. Dozens of them, walking slowly toward town, their skeletons glowing faintly through translucent flesh. The wind carried their voices, a low, beautiful chorus that made my eyes fill with tears. I should have run. Instead, I stepped outside and listened. The sound wrapped around me, warm as breath. The closer they came, the clearer the words became. "We were waiting for you, Linda," I screamed, but the sound melted into the harmony. My reflection in the window flickered, a face pale and thin, eyes black as the children's. I touched my skin. Beneath it something hummed. Now I keep the lights off, afraid they'll see me moving. Afraid they'll remember I was the one who tried to stop the choir. But the truth is, I can feel the song inside me already. It's beautiful, endless. When the thaw comes again, they'll rise in greater numbers. The world will hear them. The ice will crack open like a mouth, and from it will come the sound of every voice that ever froze and waited to be heard. And I'll be singing with them,